Hello everyone and welcome to this lesson. Today my colleague Belén Francisco and I, Juan Cruz Basile, are going to be working with the last 3 chapters of the book An Introduction to Sociolinguistics by Peter Trudgill. The social and linguistic reasons for the development of regional differences among dialects are complex and by no means completely understood. When a linguistic innovation, a new word, a new pronunciation, a new usage occur at a particular place, it may subsequently spread to other areas, particularly those nearest to it. However, this process does not only depend on proximity. Sociolinguistics is concerned with why some features spread faster than others. An important method is the speakers themselves to travel. Look at the image. It is a map of modern dialects of English in the United States and Canada based on the work of William Labov and his associates. It will be seen that many of the lines on the map dividing one dialect area from another are lines which go horizontally from left to right. Actually, these are the result of the way in which North America was settled by English speakers. As is well known, settlement was from east to west, with dialect differences which had become established on the East Coast in the early years of Anglophone settlement, being then transmitted across the country as pioneers moved westward, taking particular dialect forms with them. Notice also that the dialect areas here are large. This is a reflection of the fact that English has been spoken in North America only for 300 years. There has not been sufficient time in North America for linguistic changes to lead to the development of small dialect areas. Compare this to England, where English has been spoken for 1,500 years. Another vivid example is the Spanish conquest of the Argentine territory. Can you distinguish the diverse regional differences of a dialect?
In England, the geographical mobility, at least during the 20th century, has led to the disappearance of many dialects or dialect forms through a process which is known as dialect leveling, that is, the leveling out of differences between one dialect and another one. A similar kind of divergence can be seen in the USA, because as you probably know, there are different dialect areas in the eastern coast of the United States, and this has to do with different factors. One of them is the fact that different parts of the eastern seaboard of North America have been settled by people from also different parts of the British Isles, and what is more, at different times. So, nowhere in the eastern seaboard of North America was settled by people from one particular part of Britain. Everywhere in North America to which English was taken would have been the scene in those early years of a dialect mixture. That is, a lot of people came from different parts of England and they brought with them their many different regional dialects, causing a new dialect to emerge. This dialect would be a mixture from its origins and also uniform in its current characteristics throughout the community. So, when dialect leveling occurs in a colonial situation like this, that leads to the development of a whole new dialect, we are talking about a process known as Pigeonization.
Areas where several languages have a number of features in common due to the diffusion previously mentioned. Broadly speaking, it appears that only grammatical and phonological features require geographical proximity, whereas lexical items spread across much greater distances, particularly when the item belongs to a field of knowledge in which the resource language is dominant. Now, can you distinguish American or English influence in our Argentine dialect?
Something interesting that happens when we borrow words from one language to another is that the borrowing language tends to use the word with a narrower meaning than the donor language. For example, The word home, which is borrowed from English in French, means specifically a home for elderly people, not any house or family. If we think about our L1 Spanish, we borrow a lot of words from English. One of them is the word hater. Hater in English means an object of dislike, but in Spanish we use it to refer to somebody who has negative or hostile attitudes towards a topic or other people. Well, this is just one example, there are a lot of words. English is a source of loan words for many languages, especially in Europe, and these borrowings take place through individual bilinguals. That is, there must be somebody that knows the foreign word. And these bilingual individuals in English are becoming more and more common due to the widespread use of English as a lingua franca. The author also says that the reason of this is not the fact that English is superior towards other languages, but there is a kind of world political, economic, educational and scientific dominance of Great Britain and as well of the USA in the world.
When a language is used as a lingua franca, it normally undergoes a certain amount of reduction and simplification, and also the introduction of errors through interference from the native language of the speaker. Simplification refers most often to getting rid of irregularities, such as irregular verb forms, and redundancies, such as grammatical gender, in the lingua franca. This normally happens because, unlike small children, adults are generally not particularly good language learners. While reduction refers to the fact that, as a result of a reduction in social function, the lingua franca speakers may use the language for doing business, but not perhaps for playing football or doing the washing up. And that means that compared to the usage of a native speaker, parts of the language are missing, such as vocabulary, grammatical structures, or stylistic devices. The process by which languages may be subject to reduction, simplification, and interference in the usage of non-native speakers is called pigeonization.
A pidgin language is a lingua franca which has no native speakers. Chronologically speaking, it has derived from a normal language through processes of reduction, simplification, interference, or admixture from the native language or languages of those who use it, especially as regards pronunciation. When it is a pre-pidgin language, that is in the first steps of its development, it is generally used for trading and other limited contact situations. Well, the most likely setting for the crystallization of a pidgin language is a limited contact situation like this, with 3 or more languages. That is, 1 dominant language and 2 or more non-dominant languages. If the contact between the speakers of the dominant language and others is minimal and the dominant language is used as a lingua franca, well, then it's not so difficult to imagine how a pidgin language may arise in this context. Over time, in the lingua franca users' speech, the pre-pidgin languages acquire or will acquire a set of norms and structures that will be accepted by everybody. They will also acquire a fixed form that then linguists can study and write grammars of through a process or as a result of a process that sociolinguists call focusing. Also, a thing that is very important is that the resulting pidgin language is not the same, or it will differ or vary from pidginized forms of language, that is, which may vary also from time to time and from speaker to speaker.
It is important to realize that pidgins, like our English, although they may be different to other languages, they are different in degree and not in kind. They are genuine languages with structure and most of the attributes of other languages, and not debased, corrupt, or bad versions of a language. There is no such thing as a pure language. All languages are subject to change, and they are all the result of influence and admixture from other languages. Most of the better known pidgin languages in the world are the result of trouble on the part of European traders and colonizers. They are based on languages like English, French, and Portuguese, and are located on the main shipping and trading routes. English-based pidgins were formerly found in North America at both ends of the slave trade in Africa and the Caribbean, like Barbadian pidgin, in New Zealand and in China. They are still found in Australia, West Africa, the Solomon Islands, and in New Guinea.
Talk Python is the most widely spoken pidgin language derived from English, especially in Papua New Guinea, where it is used in radios, in the schools and newspapers, and at present it is undergoing a considerable creolization. What do I mean by this? Creole languages are pidgins that native speakers have acquired. That is, in a linguistically mixed community where a pidgin language is used as a lingua franca, children tend to acquire it as a native language, and when this happens, the language reacquires all the characteristics of a full non-pidgin language. Compared to the original pidgin, it will have an extended vocabulary, a wider range of syntactic possibilities, and also an expanding repertoire. And of course, it will be used for all purposes in a full range of social situations. Although simplification and admixture may remain, the reduction that occurred during the process of pigeonization is kind of repaired during the creolization. What happens is that, according to Derek Bickerton, who was an English linguist, children needing to use a pidgin language as a native language tend to expand it. How? Well, they do it calling on our mental genetic resources that we as human beings have, that is the human language faculty, and in this way creolization gives us or provides us with a window into the human mind, which is really fascinating. In other words, Creole languages, even though they are normal languages, their history is quite unusual. The best known are the English, the English Creoles, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the French Creoles as well. We may find French Creoles in the Caribbean, in Haiti, also in some parts of the USA, such as in Louisiana, and also in the Indian Ocean.
If there is a strong influence of the resource language over the pidgin language, the more decrealization takes place. Decrealization is a process which attacks the simplification and admixture which occur during pigeonization. One of the most interesting features of Creole languages generally is that they share a number of similarities, regardless of geographical location. Pidgin languages grow up in circumstances where the transmission of information is very difficult. There is a theory called relexification theory, which states that there are universal grammar principles for pidgins, in which the grammar of the language remains the same, but the words change.
Well, let's take as an example the African American Vernacular English. Many linguists had said or had argued that the African American Vernacular English is a descendant of an original Creole language that has been decreolized due to the centuries of contact with English. Well, what do I mean when I say decreolized? During this process, the simplification and the mixture that happened during the pigeonization are attacked. That is, we need reverse processes of this. And the reverse process of the simplification would be the complication. And the reverse process of the admixture would be the purification. So, when these two processes are total, we end up having no Creole features. So we cannot say that this has been a Creole language before. And this is very interesting because something very similar happens with some languages in the world when we say that they are post-Creole language, but they are not. I mean, they look like, but they are not post-Creoles. Why? Because sometimes these processes are not total, but partial. So we still can see to some extent simplification and admixture. In this case, we cannot say these languages are nor Creole languages, neither post-Creole languages. We even cannot say they have been pidgin languages, right?
A language which demonstrates a certain amount of simplification and admixture, but which has never been a pidgin or a Creole, in the sense that it has always had speakers who spoke a variety which was not subject to reduction, we call a Creoloid, like Singapore English. Pidgins, Creoles, and Creoloids are all languages which result from the contact between languages and are therefore called mixed languages.
Society lays down different roles for women and for men. However, what society lays down can and indeed does change. In Western societies, people are altering the way they feel about what is appropriate and what is not as regards gender roles, and these beginnings of a move away from this gender role stereotyping may explain the fact that linguistic differences between younger men and women are statistically smaller than in older speakers. Well, this reduction of linguistic sex differentiation may be explained or maybe takes place as an unconscious reflection. However, there are social movements, overt social movements, which aim to reduce sexual discrimination and gender role stereotyping, and they do it with conscious attempts to influence, to change the language and even the social behavior.
In the English language, there are discriminatory features that, although they seem to apply to both sexes, they are male-oriented. The traditional and formal way of prominalizing nouns like person, for which sex is not specified, has been by the pronoun he, not she. Nevertheless, speakers and writers have tried to avoid this appearance of inequality by actually using she as the genetic or by employing the form, what only works in writing, of course. Another solution to this problem is the use of the singular they, like in the first person to finish their dinner. Many English speakers tell their children that it is impolite to refer to someone as a woman, but not as a man. It is highly probable that the way in which their usage differs reflect and presumably also reinforce different attitudes in our society to men and women and to gender roles generally.
In recent years, the awareness about the discriminatory nature of this differentiation has led to linguistic changes on the part of some speakers. For example, some of them began avoiding using the word girl to refer to older women, and also the word lady as a trivializing euphemism. Something similar happens in USA with the names of the hurricanes, that is, before they were entirely female names, whereas now they are equally distributed between male and female names. The same happens with job description labels. They are no longer marked for sex, and this is very important. We hope language and society will both change. But although linguistic changes follow social changes usually, we do not need to wait for social changes. I mean, we need to make it happen, and in this way we need to encourage people to think about these issues as regards language, and in order to do that we need to give them more information. This is important for all reasons of fairness, equality, and even the future of humanity.
Languages are dying out at an increasingly catastrophic rate without being replaced. This happens due to language shift. Communities abandon their original language and go over speaking a new one. Linguists believe that the preservation of linguistic diversity should have a high priority in our society. They also argued that as language is intimately connected with cultures, this process of disappearance is leading our society towards what is known as cultural homogenization.
In the Americas, at least 300 languages have died out completely in the last 400 years.
There are many reasons why language shift takes place. Some people frequently abandon their language, the language that represents their history, their culture, and has been in their community for generations because they feel ashamed of it. And something similar happens with dialects. Why? Because let's take, for example, the English-speaking world. Well, the variety of English used is the standard English in schools, for example, while most children speak a non-standard English, and this may cause some educational difficulties for them, as well as some unfavorable attitudes that teachers may have towards vernacular and non-standard varieties of English. And all this may cause what is known as dialect death. Many people care for language death, but they are not so interested in what is dialect death. Why? Well, this is because they may link what is a culture with a language, but they cannot find this connection between a culture and a dialect. And this is not entirely true, because local cultures are symbolized and represented by their dialects, and that's why they maintain and defend them so much, because the dialects represent their identities. So sometimes even these identities, these local identities, are even stronger than national identities. So what causes is that these dialects act as a counter to nationalism. In modern Europe, much of dialect loss is related not only to geographical mobility and urbanization, which is inevitable, but also to attitudinal factors. The majority of the population do not speak the standard variety, and thus they are discriminated and they are made to feel that their native dialects are inferior, not only socially but also linguistically. And unlikely, they end up shifting to the standard variety even if they do not want to. In this atmosphere, it's not surprising that traditional dialects die and very quickly disappeared.
However, in some parts of the world, such as Norway, where linguistic diversity is officially recognized and protected to the point that there is a law which enforces multilingualism by stating that teachers are not allowed to try to change the way children speak in the classroom. In contrast, the British Minister of Education announced in 1994 that all children should speak standard English. Similar views are held in many other places, such as France and Poland. There is here an obvious moral issue concerning the human rights of dialect speakers.
It's important to consider what we should do about dialect differences, because, for example, in British schools, we may find even an 80% of students who are not native speakers of the standard language and the standard dialect. So, we have different approaches to this problem. One of them is the elimination of the non-standard speech. That is, schools prevent the students to speak in their native dialects, and the standard dialect is presented as the correct one, the good, the perfect.
Bidialectalism is an approach that teaches the individual to use his or her standard dialect at home, with friends, and in certain circumstances at school. However, the language for reading and writing is always the standard variety. This approach respects the children's language as a legitimate form. To this end, it requires the teacher to know the linguistic correlates of the social stratification and of the children's dialect.
The third approach is the appreciation of dialect differences. This view states that if children suffer due to attitudes that society has towards their non-standard languages or non-standard dialects, well, then it's not the language what should change, but those attitudes that society has. In other words, the problem is not really linguistic at all. And we should teach our students to read in the standard English, but beyond that, we need to attempt to educate society in terms of understanding, tolerance, and even more important, appreciation of the non-standard dialects as valid, complex, and adequate language systems. And to do this, we need teachers who are free from language prejudice. Supporters of this approach hope that this current situation will change in the future and in the long run, but what about the short run? Well, some critics have pointed out that we cannot abandon bidialectism because all those children that are the majority really who are not native speakers of the standard language or the standard dialect, they will be always at disadvantage. So at least at the moment, the only solution would be a combination of two approaches, the bidialectism and the appreciation of dialect differences, bearing in mind that bidialectism is likely to be partially successful, at least now. And then it's important to foster and to preserve language diversity. We need to understand that all languages and all dialects are amazing and they are complex constructions of the human mind, and thus they are worthy to be passed on the generations that are to come. Thank you.